Why the congregation hid the teaching of the resurrection of Jesus? He himself knew and recognized the resurrection. Welcome, dear friends, welcome to the news channel where you can find various information from all fields. Support this channel by simply clicking on the subscribe button. Introduction: The resurrection of Jesus Christ is a cornerstone of Christian faith, symbolizing victory over death and the promise of eternal life. Despite its significance, there have been periods in history when the teaching of the resurrection was obscured or downplayed within the Christian community. This article explores the reasons behind this phenomenon, examining historical, theological, and social factors that contributed to the congregation's decision to hide this crucial aspect of Christian doctrine. Historical context: Understanding the historical context of the early Christian church is essential to grasp why the resurrection might have been concealed. The first followers of Jesus lived in a time of great turmoil and persecution. The Roman Empire, under which the early Christians lived, was hostile towards new religious movements, particularly those that challenged the established order. Declaring belief in the resurrection of Jesus, which implied his divinity and ultimate authority over life and death, was seen as a direct threat to Roman power and pagan religious traditions. Theological divergences: Early Christianity was not monolithic. Various groups had differing interpretations of Jesus' life and teachings. Gnostic Christians, for example, held a spiritualized view of Jesus and his resurrection, focusing more on inner enlightenment than physical resurrection. These divergent theological perspectives led to internal conflicts and the marginalization of certain doctrines, including the bodily resurrection, which some found harder to reconcile with their philosophical views. Fear of persecution: The fear of persecution played a significant role in why some early Christians might have downplayed or hidden the teaching of the resurrection. Admitting to a belief in a risen Christ could lead to severe consequences, including imprisonment, torture, and execution. To avoid drawing the ire of Roman authorities, some congregations might have chosen to emphasize less controversial aspects of Jesus' teachings. Socio-political factors: The socio-political environment of the time also influenced the transmission of Christian teachings. Aligning with the power structures of the day often required compromises. By downplaying the resurrection, which directly challenged the Roman and Jewish authorities' control over life and death, early Christians could reduce the risk of confrontation and potential annihilation. Jewish-Christian relations: In the earliest days of Christianity, many of Jesus' followers were Jewish and sought to integrate their new faith with traditional Jewish beliefs. The concept of a resurrected Messiah was contentious within Judaism, leading to friction and division. To maintain a degree of harmony and avoid alienating potential converts, some Christian communities might have chosen to de-emphasize the resurrection. Development of Christian doctrine: The development of Christian doctrine was a gradual process. The Nicene Creed, formulated in 325 AD, was one of the first comprehensive statements of Christian belief, including the resurrection. Before such formal declarations, there was considerable diversity in belief and practice. Some congregations might have focused on aspects of Jesus' life and teachings that were more immediately relevant to their communities, sidelining the resurrection. Mystical interpretations: Mystical and allegorical interpretations of the resurrection also contributed to its concealment. For some early Christian mystics, the resurrection was seen as a symbol of spiritual awakening rather than a historical event. These interpretations, while enriching the faith, could lead to confusion and controversy, prompting leaders to avoid emphasizing the resurrection in public teachings. Leadership struggles: Struggles for leadership within the early church also played a part. Different leaders and factions promoted varying interpretations of Jesus' life and mission. In some cases, the resurrection might have been downplayed to avoid giving an advantage to rival factions that used the doctrine to support their claims to authority. The role of heresies: The threat of heresies, or beliefs deemed incorrect by mainstream Christianity, was another factor. Early church leaders often suppressed teachings they considered heretical. The resurrection, with its profound implications, was sometimes associated with heretical groups who interpreted it in ways that deviated from orthodox teachings. To maintain doctrinal purity, church leaders might have chosen to suppress or obscure the resurrection. Cultural influences: The Greco-Roman cultural milieu also influenced the transmission of Christian teachings. Concepts of bodily resurrection were alien and even repugnant to many in the Hellenistic world, who favored spiritual and philosophical ideals over physical reality. To make Christianity more palatable to these audiences, some early Christians might have downplayed the resurrection. Philosophical opposition from contemporary schools of thought, such as Epicureanism and Stoicism, which dismissed the possibility of bodily resurrection, also pressured early Christians. To engage in meaningful dialogue and gain converts from these circles, some Christian teachers might have chosen to focus on ethical teachings rather than miraculous events like the resurrection. Literary and oral traditions. The preservation and transmission of teachings in the early church relied heavily on oral tradition. The resurrection, a complex and profound event, might not have been as easily communicated or understood as simpler moral teachings. This could have led to its relative neglect in favor of more straightforward messages that were easier to pass down orally. Political manipulation. Throughout history, religious teachings have been manipulated for political ends. In some cases, the resurrection might have been downplayed or reinterpreted to support the agendas of powerful leaders or groups seeking to maintain control over the faithful. By emphasizing doctrines that aligned with their interests, they could consolidate power and influence. Esoteric knowledge. The concept of esoteric knowledge, or teachings reserved for a select few, also played a role. Some early Christian groups believed that the resurrection was a mystery to be understood only by the initiated. This secretive approach could have led to the wider congregation being kept in the dark about the full significance of the resurrection. Ecumenical concerns. Efforts to create a unified Christian identity also influenced the transmission of the resurrection teaching. To foster unity among diverse Christian communities, leaders might have chosen to focus on common beliefs and practices, sidelining more contentious or divisive doctrines like the resurrection. Ethical emphasis in early Christian teaching often overshadowed doctrinal specifics. The moral teachings of Jesus were seen as universally applicable and more immediately relevant to daily life. In contrast, the resurrection, while theologically significant, could seem abstract or distant from the pressing concerns of early Christian communities. The role of martyrdom. The concept of martyrdom, central to early Christian identity, sometimes overshadowed the resurrection. The willingness to die for one's faith was a powerful testimony to belief in eternal life. However, the immediate focus on martyrdom and suffering might have led to less emphasis on the resurrection as a historical event. Scriptural interpretations also varied widely. Some early Christian texts and apocryphal writings presented different views on the resurrection. The lack of a standardized canon until the 4th century meant that diverse and sometimes conflicting accounts influenced the beliefs and teachings of different communities. Resurrection as allegory. The allegorical interpretation of the resurrection as a metaphor for spiritual renewal rather than a literal event gained traction among some early Christians. This approach, while enriching the spiritual understanding of the resurrection, could lead to its marginalization in favor of more immediate moral and ethical teachings. Modern reflecting on why the resurrection was hidden or downplayed, helps modern Christians understand the complexities of early Christian history. It sheds light on the diverse ways in which Jesus' life and teachings were understood and transmitted. By acknowledging these factors, contemporary believers can appreciate the richness and depth of their faith tradition. Conclusion. The decision to hide or obscure the teaching of the resurrection of Jesus was influenced by a complex interplay of historical, theological, and social factors. From fear of persecution to theological divergences, the early Christian community faced numerous challenges that shaped the transmission of their beliefs. Understanding these factors enriches our appreciation of the resilience and adaptability of early Christians and underscores the profound significance of the resurrection in the ongoing story of Christian faith.